next speaker is Chen, and it was really exciting to, like I said yesterday, there were a number of people we really wanted to reach out to and get here, and she was on that short list at the beginning, and it's just great to have her. Look forward to hearing her speak on NFC.
Hello. Great, that's better. All right, I have a lot of things to show you, so I have to use this instead of walking around the kind of hang out here behind the podium. Was anyone here at the Big Android barbecue? Not here, but all right, you guys can leave. Just kidding. So this is a very similar talk to what I did at the Big Android barbecue, but I updated it a little bit with some newer stats. But I go around and I sort of talk about NFC quite a lot. A lot of people know me as the NFC person because I really love NFC. Because a little bit about me, I'm actually not really an Android developer. I would say I don't really do that much Android development, but I do work with Android and external hardware. So if anyone's worked with the open accessories or the NFC APIs, it's like these ways that Android can interact with the real world. I've had some hardware experience previously teaching electronics and also doing art installations, like interactive ones. So that's kind of why I started getting into Android and external hardware. But my day job is actually a web developer. So speaking of telcos, I actually work at Canada's second or third largest telco, which is TELUS, working on their mobile website. So my day job is pretty unrelated to anything I'm talking about today. But I really like NFC because I think the key thing about NFC is that it makes technology disappear. I really like working with technology, but I don't want to have to have it burden me. And I really want to make electronics or technology that makes, whoa, I guess I have to log in. I really want to make technology that, actually I don't need to be online, that disappears. And if you sort of heard Jonah talking yesterday, he talked about the chasm, where a lot of us who are in this room right now, we're early adopters. So we see technology and we grasp onto it right away, and we understand it inherently, and we sort of wonder, why doesn't everyone else understand all the things that we do? And it's because we're early adopters. We understand technology so much quicker than everyone else. But as technology and certain platforms get more popular, they sort of hit this chasm where a lot of technology, you just have to get past this gap where the early adopters and anyone who might be in sort of a more mainstream audience, you just have to kind of sort of bridge this gap between us who are very technically savvy and users who, like your mom and your dad, who don't necessarily need NFC or don't even know what NFC is. So it's kind of up to us as developers and evangelists to sort of tell them, what are the cool things you can do with technology, and how is it actually going to improve their lives? And that's the key thing. It's a lot of people won't accept technology until they realize how it's going to improve their life. And also, sort of related to NFC is that, I always sort of say, quote William Gibson, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And we hear that a lot about NFC, where it's this technology where, we are yeah, this is the year for NFC, or next year is going to be NFC, or it's going to explode. But then a lot of people are no, it's not going to work. It's who cares? Or it's not going to, nothing's going to happen with it until Apple accepts it. But I really think that, NFC is here. There's a lot of cool things to do with it. Obviously much beyond mobile payments. So it's up to us as developers to really think about these other use cases for it, so it is more widely adopted and that people really do want it on their platform. So that would put a little bit of pressure on Apple, put a lot of pressure on other platforms who don't already have it, and just sort of raise the bar for NFC. So if you don't know much about NFC, I'm going to give you a little bit of history lesson. NFC stands for Near Field Communication. And there's just a little short history where I'm just going to go back in time a little bit to 1935. So this is World War II, and Sir Robert Alexander Watson Watt invents radar, which is actually radio detecting and ranging. So at that time, they were having a hard time figuring out if planes coming in were friendly or they were enemy. And so they sort of realized that if they shoot radio beams up into the sky and an airplane starts flying in and rolls, the radio waves get reflected back in a different way, and they can actually detect that from the ground. So this is like sort of their technique for figuring out if an airplane was friendly and they should allow them in. And that was just using radio waves. And then a little bit later during the Cold War, so a lot of inventions happened during wartime, unfortunately, but actually good for us, I guess, now that we're past wartime. Leon Theremin, he invented the first passive bug for spying. So these are sort of like those things that you see in spy movies where you stick it behind a picture, no one knows it's there, but you can listen in on it. And it's a very similar idea to radar, where you're shooting radio waves at something and you listen for things to come back. But the key thing about this invention was that the bug was passive, meaning that you didn't have a battery pack on it, so it actually was just a flat device, and you didn't have to worry about plugging it in or batteries. And obviously during that time, batteries were probably gigantic. So this is something very discrete and something that stood alone, so it was passive. And the key thing to both these things is that you kind of have to imagine that you have a sort of space gun and it's shooting out radio waves at something, and then as it reflects back, you listen to what is happening when it hits that surface. And so they use the same sort of idea of shooting radio waves at something to produce something called RFID, and that's radio frequency identification. You're probably really familiar with RFID. Let me just shoot over here to my lo-fi webcam. So you're probably pretty familiar with these because you go to a store, you see these little tags on everything, and you know that if you walk out of the store without actually buying something, these things will probably trigger the alarm at the door. So the evolution of RFID, happened over the 50s, 60s, 70s. It evolved and became sort of this wild west of like radio waves all over the place. So it wasn't until 2003, so not that long ago, 10 years ago, where NFC actually grew out of RFID to become a recognized specification. So it became a thing. It finally became something that was not just lumped into RFID. It actually became a standard. And you can see that this logo here is called the N mark. It's the worst logo ever, and I think it actually makes, it hurts NFC because it's so ugly, no one wants to put it onto their products. So hopefully one thing we can try to lobby is to get a better logo for NFC. And so a lot of people ask, what's the difference between RFID and NFC? And so, a little science class lesson is that, radio waves, or most waves, have sort of two properties. One is wavelength, and another is amplitude. So wavelength is how far something travels. Amplitude is sort of how high the waves travel. And so low frequency waves, they're very big waves, and they can travel very far. So in terms of RFID, someone might tag their cattle with RFID and actually be able to track the movement of cattle over 100 yards. And then mid-frequency is sort of like something, obviously you can't travel as far, but that little sticker that I showed you, that I tore off a box, you don't have to walk right up to an alarm system to trigger it. And if you're still in the store, you don't trigger it. So it's sort of mid-length where you have to be in this sort of happy zone before it triggers. And so, the waves that happen with mid-frequency, they don't travel very far. They're sort of close. And then high frequency is sort of the things that you see in your credit cards or with a lot of mobile payments, is that it's high frequency. So it doesn't reach, the waves don't reach very far because it's very high frequency. The amplitude of the waves are quite high, so it doesn't go very far. So you have to be in very, very close range. And so specifically, NFC fits into this whole picture at a 13.56 megahertz. So you can't say 14 megahertz or even 16 megahertz. It has to be very specifically 13.56. And so, a year later, the NFC Forum sort of got together, and they were a bunch of financial institutes, mobile handset manufacturers, carriers, anyone who was a stakeholder with NFC. They sort of got together and they formed the NFC Forum. And they sort of came together and said, we need a little bit more regulation around, how we actually pass information back. So they produced what was called the NDEF format, so NFC data exchange format. So that was like the biggest thing that we see today as developers is this NDEF format. And that was in 2004. And so a lot of people say, oh, I've been to Japan, and they're like crazy because their technology, like you can get onto the subway with your phone and all this other stuff. And I'd say it is true that Japan actually has like a lot of crazy technologies that are ahead of the curve. But at that time, in 2004, what was happening was that you had NFC tags on your phone, but it wasn't a two-way communication. So the stuff that was happening in Japan was sort of like me taking my PayPass credit card and taping it to my phone. So it was sort of the same idea. There wasn't too much craziness with your actual device. So it wasn't until like 2005 where Nokia really pioneered a lot of NFC with mobile devices. They created the first NFC shell. So this is something that on top of your regular phone, it was sort of this silicon shell that you put onto your phone, and it gave it two-way NFC connections. And so then a year later, they actually put NFC built into their phones. So from 2006 to 2010, there wasn't a lot going on. Nokia obviously was pioneering a lot of NFC on their devices, but it was mostly staying in Europe. And so it wasn't until 2010 that Android and Google officially put out the Galaxy Nexus S, which was the first NFC-enabled Android device. Who had this device? Yeah, it was one of my favorite devices. And so sort of the moral of the story is that between World Wars and today, there was like a really long evolution for radio waves, RFID, NFC. So when you read these articles that say, oh, NFC has missed its window, you kind of have to wonder, like, do they really think technology only lasts a year and then it disappears? So technology has this really long tail. And so NFC will be around. It currently is in a bit of niches or in some verticals, but it's sort of up to us to really hammer home to everyone else who is a mainstream audience, what the cool things of NFC are. So I haven't updated these stats, but this is something from last year where you can sort of see the trend of all the devices with NFC on them are majority Android phones. Android tablets have really exploded since then, so I'm sure this little area is a lot bigger. But you can see that most other most other operating systems do have a form of NFC support. But you can see that most of the movement is going to happen in Android. It's not going to necessarily happen in other platforms. And you can see that devices that are coming out, some of these have already come out, and some of them are still waiting to come out. You can see that Android is still leading the charge in terms of the devices that have NFC on them. But an interesting trend is that Windows Phone 8, it's only been a year since it came out. You can see that there's a lot of devices that are Windows is adopting NFC, so you see a lot of devices, both mobile and desktop devices that have NFC. So there's something really interesting that's going to happen there with desktop devices and phones, because we carry multiple devices with us. And the 2012 Google I/O, Hugo Barrow said that 1 million NFC Android devices are shipped every week. So you can see that the technology is like getting out there. We just have to show them what to do with it. And you kind of have to wonder, like, why is this trend of NFC happening right now? And obviously mobile payment is going to be a really big part of it. As, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And so they obviously have a lot of deep pockets in order to put out payment systems. And so you're going to see the early adopters the mainstream audience probably come because of mobile payments, because they're going to have so much money to advertise to show them what NFC is. But I think for us as developers, like, there's some other interesting trends that are really interesting. And obviously, I'm not going to get into too much of why smartphones are popular. But I will talk about some of the NFC APIs that are available in Android and other platforms. So mobile wallet is one of them, and I will touch on that. I don't really talk too much about mobile wallet simply because Mobile wallet only exists because of this something called the secure element on a device. So as an everyday developer, you don't get access to that secure element. So it's up to sort of the handset manufacturers and the carriers to sort of agree that they will enable mobile wallet. But to us, like, we can't actually access that secure element. But most of us can read and write to NFC tags. We can launch apps immediately after scanning. We can change system settings after scanning a tag. We can pair with Bluetooth devices. We can do peer-to-peer data transfer. So this is the more interesting part, I think, is not just reading tags that are out in the wild, but actually interacting with other people with devices that also have NFC. And here's like sort of an extra item where I said built-in peer-to-peer, and it's hard to figure out from other platforms if there is a built-in NFC transfer. Android has Android Beam, so that's kind of why I said that was built in. Windows Phone has something called the Proximity API, which is somewhat similar, but I couldn't figure out what Simian and Query are doing. So there's a lot of support for NFC. And I always say, poor Apple, I don't know what they're doing, so I'm just actually going to ignore them. But to be fair to Apple, we have a lot of other platforms that are also cropping up. We have Ubuntu, Firefox OS, and even Chromium, like Chrome OS, the open source version of it. Like, those are all platforms that are growing, and they're getting out there. And so we kind of have to, if you're someone who contributes, see if you can contribute the NFC APIs there, or just sort of rally for them to add it. Because actually, the interesting thing is with the Chromium OS, they actually do have it stubbed out for NFC. So there's no Chrome OS devices that have NFC, but we can kind of see that maybe one day in the future we will. I'm not going to get too technical in this talk, but if you are interested, I did a chapter in this book called Android Sensor Programming. It's all about incorporating external data, or like sort of taking your phone and looking at the real world and using it in interesting ways. But obviously, if you're too cheap to buy the book, which is okay, don't worry, you can actually go onto GitHub and get, there's 3 projects that I have on here that are just like starter apps. So if you are interested in just getting started and playing around, you should be able to just like download this, set it up in your Eclipse, and just like start reading and writing right away. And nfc.android.com is sort of your resource for anything Android NFC API related. So I'm going to talk a bit about some tags. Who actually has like tags already? I knew you guys were like pretty early adopter here, but I'm just going to spend some time to talk about, what are the different tags that you can see, or buy actually. And so you might hear when you read the documentation or ever watch Google talk about supported tags as having a type 1, 2, 3, or 4. So this is coming out of the NFC forum. They created NDEF, but they also created some other standards around what the property of the tags are and how they read and write data. So the most popular one that you'll probably see when you go shopping is tag type 1 or 2, because they're quite cheap. Like, they're $1 to $2, just buying a few of them. Obviously, if you buy in bulk, you're going to get really good prices on that. But they don't have a lot of memory. They only have 96 bytes or 48 bytes, up to 144. So that's pretty small, but it's enough to put in a URL or a few bits of data. But it is the most popular one that you can probably find, just because it's so cheap. Number 3 and 4 are much harder to find because they're more for sort of big rollouts, where I noticed when I got into the Metrolink today, or yesterday, I got this card, and I was kind of used to like getting cards from like New York, where it's just like a piece of paper and there was like a reader on it, and then I got to the booth and I was like, oh, I have to tap this? And like, oh, it must be NFC. So the kind of cool thing is that if you have an NFC reader app on your phone, you can actually just go around and just scan anything and make sure, see what kind of type of card it is. And I believe this was, I think it was a type 4. And then the ones here down at the bottom, they actually are quite popular too, the MyFair Classics. simply because they are cheap and they have a much more memory. So if you can imagine that between 48 bytes and 4K, like that's a lot of space when it's just a sticker. But the unfortunate thing is MyFair Classics, they have a proprietary way that you read and write to them. So it's up to sort of the handset manufacturer or the operating system to sort of license this sort of proprietary way to read and write tags. So you see MyFair tags supported by the Nexus S, the Galaxy Nexus, but you might have heard a bit of a kerfuffle around the Nexus 4 where it doesn't support MyFair Classics anymore. So LG just didn't want to support it. But any sort of Samsung device will support MyFair types. So I'm just going to switch back to here. Oops. So if you haven't really seen tags before, they come in a lot of varieties. They come as stickers, and then you can put your logo on it. They also come as other round stickers. And so essentially, like when you open it up and you look inside, there's actually, they're both similar despite being one being square and one being circular, is that there are a ring of wires or metal, and that's the antenna. And then you have some blocks that are pretty small, and that's actually an integrated circuit. So it's like they had their own special space gun and they shrunk all these integrated circuits down onto like this little piece of paper. So it's pretty cool that, this, you can store data on this, and when you pass your phone over it, your phone sends out the radio waves, and it actually charges up the IC on here, the integrated circuit, and actually is able to send back information. So that's why it's able to stay so small. It's passive, so it doesn't need to be powered by a battery. They come in bracelets now, and essentially inside of here is probably just another sticker. It's just like a different form factor for different things that you want to do. They come in awesome key tags. They come enclosed in plastic, so you can see that here, it's actually just wound up wire in here, which is kind of interesting that you can actually like buy some of these where it seems a bit more raw and it seems sort of more old school. Here's another example of a keychain where you can actually go and see what's happening on the inside. They come in big stickers, plastic cards. You find them in your credit cards. If you're ever interested in sewing it onto clothes, they sell these ones where there's a hole in it and it's waterproof, so you can actually send it through to wash. But there's an NFC tag in there. Or just other plastic pellets that you can incorporate into, like stick it into a pocket. And the last one I'll sort of point out is if you ever wanted to sort of tag something with electronics materials, so something that might interfere with the radio waves, you have to buy these special ones where you can sort of see that it's not as thin as the typical stickers, it's actually a little bit thick. So they have to put an isolating layer on it in order for it to not touch other metals or for it to sort of block radio waves. So if you are going to tag electronics, make sure you buy the ones that are a little bit thicker because that's the ones that are going to protect you from other radio waves and short circuits. I think I went through my collection. I kind of collect them. Oh, sorry about my line up there. So sort of the first thing that you can kind of do with NFC, the most simple thing to start off with, is just reading and writing to NFC tags. So Samsung had this huge campaign last year where they sort of were really smart and they were sort of training people to understand that there's something cool on their phones. So they had these giant billboards that were life-size where they asked you to come up to the phone and touch it in order to get a phone. But there wasn't anything too special on the actual poster, it was just a URL. And the good thing about just having the URL is that it would just go to a website and then whatever is on your website that you want people with the download, you can change it whenever because it's going to be on your server. So you don't have to embed information onto these stickers because that would be a waste if you had to change the content and then find every single poster and update it. So just pointing someone to a URL for online content is really easy. You can also sort of use NFC where you have a URL on it. Foursquare does this where, if you are a venue, you can actually go and put your Foursquare venue ID onto an NFC sticker tag for people to check in. And so if someone doesn't have if someone doesn't have the Foursquare app installed on their phone, they'll actually just go online. But if they do have the NFC app, so I'll just show you the version where, I have a Foursquare sticker here, so this would be me as a venue owner. I want people to check in quite often, so I want to make it really, really easy for someone to do this. If I scan, you can see how quickly that scans. I don't have a Foursquare app on this one, so it just sends me to a website, the mobile version of Foursquare. But if I am a Foursquare user and I already have my app, and I scan, it just goes directly to the venue that I want people to check into, and then for someone to check in, it's as easy as just clicking the check-in button. So that sort of took down the steps of checking in, from 3 or 4 steps into 1. So it really makes technology disappear. And if you already have an app out in the market and you sort of have a service where your URLs are structured in a way that you can sort of detect what someone's doing, you can actually it's really easy to set up an intent filter in your Android app and not have a lot of deep integration with NFC, but just detect URLs in order to launch directly into your app. So you do have to have set up your feature and your permissions to allow NFC. And in your intent filter, you're looking for the NDEF discovered, and so if you recall, NDEF is sort of the format of most NFC tags. So you're looking for something that has NDEF formatted data on it, and then you can just go ahead and launch your app based on whether or not it had the URL m.foursquare.com on it /venue, or if you had other sort of settings, you can just sort of change your URL in order to launch into different areas of your site or different areas of your app. And you can, instead of just URLs, you can launch application-specific data. So there's an app it used to be called Touch a Note. They recently renamed to Tap My Note, where it's actually a plugin, if you want to call it that, for Evernote, which will allow you to directly launch into an Evernote article. So say here I have a container, I put my popcorn kernels in it. I don't actually, but let's say theoretically I keep my popcorn kernels in it. It could be anything, it could be your spices. And you just want to have a contextual information, so something that is related to the physical object that you have. I don't have to be online for this, but I think I'm pretty sure it's this one that I have it on. I believe I have Touch a Note on here. If I scan, it's going to launch directly into that article for perfect popcorn recipes. It's a little bit overblown there. But I didn't have to be online for that. That was all offline. So it's something that you can really add to deep link into your app, but have it very contextual to the object that you're trying to scan. I'm going to skip over this one, but that is this computer tracker is sort of the NFC starter app that I have on GitHub. And so it's very similar to adding an intent filter for URLs, but this time you're going to listen for a special MIME type. So that's sort of a way that you can have tags only launch your app. Is by just putting in coming up with a special MIME type for your app and for your tags. And so every time you write a tag, you're going to use a special MIME type. But everything else is sort of the same. You're still listening to NDEF discovered, and you have the same permissions. And so you're going to see business cards as sort of a big wave. Moo is coming out with some cards, hopefully soonish. But as a tip, you can put your contact information onto a card. But the more interesting thing would be putting on things that make people want to keep your card around. So don't just think about putting your business card and your contact information on the NFC, because someone can just scan it once and then they throw out your card. So that's sort of a waste of an NFC business card. So put something on it that makes people want to keep your card. So maybe it launches special actions. So something where, if you have your name on this card and it launches special things on their phone, they're going to want to keep that card around because it helps make all these steps a lot quicker. Or something where someone would want to pass it along. So if you have a promo code on this card, someone's going to want to keep it and then pass it along to someone. If it's just your contact information, someone's just going to scan it and then they're going to put it in the garbage. So that's a bit of a waste. Another big thing for NFC is just identification. So very similar to what RFID did. Was anyone here at Google I/O? Yeah, so you might have, if you weren't there, or you might have seen that there were like giant lineups for the Chromebook Pixels after they're announced. And it was like this lineup that just sort of wrapped around and went into the cafeteria. And everyone was like, oh, don't worry, the lineup goes fairly quickly. And it did actually go fairly quickly for the number of people there, simply because Google I/O, they put NFC tags on all the badges this year. So they had all these kiosks set up with Nexus 10s, where they used the Nexus 10 as a kiosk and your tag as your sort of identification. So it was really quick to get through that line, pick up your Chromebook, and then head out. Disney World is actually a really, really big adopter of NFC. So they have been sort of pioneering NFC within their sort of walled garden for quite a long time. And nowadays they actually have, they're testing a project called Magic Bands, or My Magic Plus, where they give all attendees and hotel guests an NFC wristband. Sort of like the one I showed you here, except for obviously Disney-fied. And you can actually get it to your hotel room. Whenever you buy a drink, you can use this to connect it up to your credit card. Whenever you want to get onto a ride, you sort of scan. And so this is really interesting because it allows you to track movement, like real-world movement, where if it takes someone 5 minutes from the start of a lineup to get to the end, they can actually track that data by scans. And you actually have something quantifiable that you can actually use to run analytics on. And it's just much better to have actual real data that's more accurate than some employees just sort of saying, I think 100 people came through, or maybe it was 120. Like when you have NFC and people are scanning, you have actual real data, and it's very automated. And so I think in terms of this XDA crowd, this is probably what you guys, if you have NFC, this is probably what you guys do most, is task automation. So the awesome thing with Android, obviously, is it has intents. So anything you want to do can launch things directly, deep link you into apps, it can change system settings. So you can always buy any sort of tag, download an app from TagStand. There's tons of others, like if you just do a search for task automation or NFC, you come up with so many apps. But it allows you to very quickly change settings on your phone. So anytime, let's see. So I have like my XDA keychain that I put a Wi-Fi toggle onto it. So whenever I go to a cafe, I just scan it. I'm on a hotspot. When I leave, I scan it again. It turns off my hotspot. So it's very quick. I don't have to do anything in terms of fiddling with settings. But another project that I had sort of worked on, because I really want to make technology, I really like wearables. So I sort of made this NFC case, where it doesn't look like very much right now, but it actually on the inside, and it's actually hidden away there, is this sort of cool special material, which doesn't look special at all, but it actually blocks near-field communication waves. So high-frequency waves, you might find these in sort of the wallets that you put your passports in. It actually blocks the waves. So if you put a tag, let me actually show you a demo. And so remember that you have to, like when you're scanning NFC, you do have to unlock your phone, and that's a security benefit where you don't want to have someone just like scan your bum or anything like that. So your phone does have to be unlocked in order to read NFC tags. And it doesn't have to be in your home screen. It could be anywhere because NFCs and Android know to fire the intents and send you to the right spot. But you can see that if I'm just scanning, it found a card. But I can actually put it this special material on it. And it completely blocks any sort of waves from coming through. So it's a really interesting fabric. So what I had done was, there's actually 4 NFC stickers in here. There's 2 on the outside, and then a layer of that fabric, and then 2 on the inside. With the idea that, if I'm at the movie theater, and I want it to be quiet, there's this one side where if I put my phone in, on the quiet side, it's going to read the NFC tag and just turn everything on to quiet. So I don't have to worry about fiddling before going to the movie theater. I just know that if I put it in my case in a certain way, it's going to just automatically turn everything to silent. And then when I come out of the theater, I just take it out and I want to turn it back up to high volume because I can never hear anything in my backpack. I just pop it in. And you didn't really hear that, but it just went ahead and fired it on and put it on to full volume. And then I have tags on the outside, so when I want to just put it on sort of regular volume, I just sit it on here, and it just puts it on to sort of like my default setting that I prefer. So it's a very awesome way to just automate things and not have to worry about technology. So I keep on saying I really want technology to just sort of disappear. I want to just be part of our the fabric of our life. You might have seen this sort of Kickstarter. I don't know. I wonder if anyone kickstarted this. It's NFC rings. Did anyone kickstart this? Yeah. So it's really interesting because it's going back to wearables where you might have these little devices that you wear around. And the electronics are going to get more and more small. So NFC, you can actually get pretty small. These ones are probably the smallest I've seen so far. But it's something that you just incorporate into your lifestyle. And so you can do anything that I did with my case or with a regular tag. But the idea is that you wear it all the time. So I think something that might be really cool with this is that if you have something that requires authentication, you can just have these on your rings. And if you have one device, you could figure out who was actually using that device based on the person wearing the ring. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with just task automation. We're going to see another wave of devices that have NFC on them. So I kind of pointed at this kind of funny Korean example where a lot of the rice cookers nowadays, or they have this one rice cooker that has NFC on it, so you can actually program recipes using your phone, and then you tap it onto the rice cooker. And so that's really interesting because rice cookers have typically really bad UIs, but software apps or mobile device apps, you have a lot more room to play with. So you can actually make really rich interfaces. But the way that you connect it to another device is just by tapping, and then you sort of offset the UI onto your phone versus trying to shoehorn a rice cooker to be a smartphone with a rice cooker. And then there's phones with Android running on them. So I think there could be some really interesting play there with just putting more of the user interaction on your device and just having your sort of appliance just be smart. A cool project from someone on Google+, her name, she goes by Robot Girl. She actually made these very cool learning robots for kids where you have these hats and then you have this robotic bird. And in each of these hats, there's an NFC tag. So based on which hat you put on the bird, there's a reader up here at the top of its head. Depending on which hat you put on, it actually gives the bird a different personality. So if you put on, this top hat, it flaps its wing differently. And if you put on this ball cap, it actually might move its beaks. So it's kind of a really cool way of making technology disappear. A cool thing that you can get from Adafruit are these NFC Shields, where if you're really interested in this play between mobile devices and external hardware, you can actually buy these shields. So I have one here. So you have your regular Arduino, and then you have this Adafruit shield. And in here's the reader. And so I got the wrong wire, so I'm going to see if I can actually hook this up and show you at the same time, because it's going to be a bit of a limbo here. All right, so how am I going to do this? So I soldered onto an LED right there. So let's see if this works. It actually is working. It's just my bad missing my wires. So I have an LED on here. So if I scan a tag, and I can actually turn the LED on or off. And if you give me a slight moment, if anyone, if anyone's sort of seen this Kickstarter for something called Lockatron, it's this kind of a cool tool that you can go, you hook it onto your home lock system, and you can actually unlock your doors using your mobile device. They said that there might be an NFC version of this coming, but you can actually sort of create your own. Hooking of electronics under pressure. All right, so I have this servo motor, and then I have my NFC reader. All right, let's see if I can do this. So I can actually have, an NFC reader activate other things in the real world. So you can imagine that I could have an authenticating app on my phone, also have the firmware running on the Arduino that has the same sort of timestamp, and I can actually tap my phone and authenticate and actually act on things in the real world. So I think that's going to be a really big thing for this prototyping and sort of this movement towards smart appliances. Something that's sort of built into Android with the more recent API updates is just Bluetooth pairing. So we're seeing a lot more devices that have Bluetooth built into it. Like Sony's got quite a few devices actually with NFC on them. Headphones, Bluetooth handsets. Headsets are very popular. So music is obviously, audio pairing is obviously a very widely accepted use of NFC for pairing. So we're going to see quite a lot more devices with just NFC built into it, just to get rid of that hassle of Bluetooth pairing. Because no one really likes looking through their settings in order to find that Bluetooth settings. So this is the kind of one that I think is the most interesting, is peer-to-peer transfer. So Android's got something called Android Beam built into it, where when you touch two phones together, both sides usually see something that says touch to beam. So on one person's end, they have to decide that they're going to beam something to someone, and it sort of acts, when someone touches that touch to beam, it almost acts like turning your phone into a regular tag, and then the other phone can read it. So it's a really interesting play with how you can trade information with people, you can make your applications more social. So I actually want to, let's see, how much time do I have? Okay, I have time. So I want to share with you guys a game that I really like playing. Who's played Space Team before? Okay, so Space Team is this really funny independent game where it's 2 to 4 players, and you have to pretend to be flying a spaceship. And you get these instructions on the screen where it's turn on the flagellator, and then you have to look for the panel that says flagellator on it, and then you have to click on it, or there's some really funny ones in there, but you have to shout out all the instructions, and you hope that someone else is going to be able to find that panel before your spaceship crashes. So I think this is a really awesome social game that I think everyone should have. So I'm going to start off by, I'm just going to show you, if you have not Android Beam before, I'm just going to show you how that works, where I have the app on my phone right here, and this phone doesn't have it yet. So you have to both be unlocked. So this one has the game, this one is unlocked. And then you just have to do a little bit of play to figure out where your NFC tags are on your phone. But on this side, you can see that it says touch to beam. If I touch and the other person doesn't do anything, it's going to send you to the Play Store, and you can very, very quickly download this app. So, because I think this might be fun to play during your breaks, I'm going to start with Jordan over here, and I'm going to beam this to him, and it's up to him to beam it, download it, and beam it to someone else. And we'll actually see how long this takes to spread this game to throughout this entire room. Cool, so that was, I went around the room for 3 minutes. Who has not downloaded the game yet? The network? Oh, no, that's the worst part. I was hoping everyone would be on their own 3G or something. But for this audience, it probably took me, it took me 3 minutes to get around. And probably if everyone was passing along. So there were some like weird ones where I was like, I don't know where your NFC is on the back of your phone. So that's going to be obviously a UI problem where, like, I know that with the HTC One, it's where the camera is, but most phones actually have it somewhere in the back. But we can sort of imagine that, after 10 minutes, everyone would have this device, or have this game called Space Team on their device, and if the network was a bit better, we can start playing right away. So it would only take us 10 minutes in order to get your app to be really viral and spread across this room. So if you do enjoy playing this game, go ahead and pass it on to someone else. It's not my game, I just think it's a really fun group game. And to sort of enable your own peer-to-peer in your application, so not using Android Beam, you can actually use these two APIs, enable foreground NDEF push, and set the push callback message. So it's fairly easy, and this is in my sort of NFC starter app. It's already built into it. So you can feel free to play around. And the last thing is that you can use NFC as part of a bigger picture. It's not just about having phone-to-phone interactions. With more desktop devices or laptops coming out with NFC, you're going to see NFC on these desktop devices too. And if you kind of remember a couple years ago where Microsoft had the Surface, so not their new Surface, but like their old Surface, which was sort of like a giant table, that actually had NFC on it too. So this one sort of storyteller, Lance Wheeler, he actually made this project called Pandemic for the Sundance Festival, where he actually was able to get 50 Nexus S devices, and he actually gave them out to people as part of this storyline where a pandemic had broke out, and so they had to go and collect things to bring back to Command Central. And so they had all these objects throughout Sundance. They had 600 NFC tags that people had to go around and collect things. And the cool thing is that when they came back to sort of Command Central, they had a Microsoft Surface table set up where everyone went and brought their phones into Command Central, put them on the Surface, and then it was able to just like pull out all of your things that you had collected using NFC. So it was a really awesome way of just using NFC and not having a lot of people think about NFC as a technology, but more as what it enabled. And so just as a recap, NFC is great for creating these low friction interactions. So improve your onboarding experience. Put someone directly into this space that they should be interacting with versus having to fiddle with menus. You can augment physical objects even offline. You can track and personalize real-world interactions. You can get other people to make your app more viral because it encourages sharing using the peer-to-peer APIs. And the great thing is that this is NFC is great because it's platform agnostic. It uses the NDEF format, but eventually when every device has NFC on it, you don't have to worry about what platform it is. You just have to know that there's this protocol, sort of like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, where you don't have to worry about what the platform is. You just worry about the data that you're transferring. So once again, you can contact me on Google Plus or on Twitter. Here's a link to my GitHub again, and then I have this like funny sort of Google Plus page where it's NFC TW. So if you find anything cool on Google Plus that has NFC on it and you just want to tag it, it makes your post look kind of cool because it's like NFC for the win. But it'll sort of send it to my account and I just reshare all these like NFC for the win posts. So feel free to tag any of those. So thank you so much for coming. And oh, good, I'm right on time. So I think I have 7 minutes.
We can do
or like a couple questions if anyone wants to ask any.
We have time for questions. Back by popular demand, the guy that asks questions in every session is here with a question.
Good morning. Hi. I had a question. I really liked your phone case to turn it quiet, but I was wondering, is there an easy way to selectively automate so that it would only respond to that, to your phone case's go quiet command and not then automatically accept any other NFC tags when it's out of the case?
I would say no, because it's such a standard format, there's not a lot of authentication. So if something can read and write to tags, so specifically read from a tag, anything can read from it. So there's no security at all. Unless maybe you made an application-specific tag and then encoded it in a special way, so that might be something where instead of downloading TagStand's app or someone else's app, you make your own task automation app, and then you sort of put your own special line type on it, and then that's like a little bit level of sort of security or authentication. But if someone else had your app too, they could also read the same tags. So there's not a lot of huge security in that terms, but there are ways to make it more geared towards yourself.
Thank you.
There's an app for that.
Right here.
It's called the NFC Task Loader. You can actually automate.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it called?
NFC Task Launcher.
NFC Task Launcher?
Yeah.
But if everyone had that same app?
Yeah, but if he wants to, it specifically lets you set up an automation task. So then when you scan that tag, and you can also add other criteria.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a question in regards to security as well. And more so, what's your opinion on how the security risks of NFC will impact the technology? Because as you just mentioned, there's really no security. So, credit cards that are in your pocket, people can go by, pull data off those. And, my phone reacts to certain NFC tags. There's a risk, like you said, that someone could copy the tag and basically control my phone or my device, etc. How do you think that'll impact them?
Yeah, I think there's obviously there's malicious people out there, and if you're the type of person who likes to scan everything without any consideration to security, it's sort of the same as getting a link in your email. You kind of have to observe some sort of should I scan this tag? Is it from someone that I know? So I think that's sort of the first level, is just having some common sense as to what you should scan, because it is quite possible that you could scan a link that sends you to somewhere malicious and then you could possibly download something. But I like to think that people are much nicer than that, so I usually don't think about that too often. And in terms of security, say with credit cards, I actually had my credit card's number taken from me a couple weeks ago. But that sort of thing happens all the time. I don't think NFC is going to increase that, because you do have to be within a certain proximity of someone in order to be able to scan your NFC credit card. So it has to be someone who's come in contact with you, where it's actually more likely that I could set up a keylogger or listen to the Wi-Fi traffic and get a credit card information off that much easier than trying to scan everyone's back pocket to figure out if they have NFC cards. But it always surprises me how people who are malicious, they just have their own agenda and they do anything it takes possible. So I think you just have to take NFC like a small grain of salt and realize that there's actually more benefits to it than some of the security ones. But that's mostly why I don't talk about mobile payments, because I don't really care about it too much. I care more about these other smaller interactions. Let's see.
Hi, question regarding Android Beam API. This one application can send one single package to the other device with confirmation. So there's no place for kind of reply or any complex protocol. Is there any kind of lower level protocol or something in NFC which could be used to actually have a bit more complex communication, like a two-way communication between devices?
I suppose you could have something where if you, I saw this weird keyboard where you can put your NFC phone on the middle of it, and instead of using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, it actually like logged NFC your key presses. So it was really weird. It was a weird keyboard. But that's probably not the right use case scenario for NFC. So I think a lot of people want to overuse NFC, where the best thing to use NFC is to make that handshake and then pass it off to Bluetooth, which is going to be a lot faster and more reliable. Because obviously, like when I walked around here, we had to have our phones at the right position in order to send that data across. And if you move your phone away during that time, you can actually like lose the package that you're trying to send. So it's not as great for a long-term communication. So it's better just to use NFC for that handshake and pass them off to either a Bluetooth sort of connection, where it's going to be like one-to-one, or to like go through Wi-Fi.
Next one up front.
Hi, Pearl. Do you have any tips for the Android Beam experience and then the pre-Android Beam experience is so different? Have you written anything that kind of tries to bridge that experience where someone with a 4-up phone and a 2 phone can kind of not be in completely different worlds?
What do you mean by the pre-beam and post-beam?
Well, when they introduced Android Beam, you cannot define just the user experience of sending something on NFC anymore. But in Gingerbread, I mean, it was quietly, you could do anything, right? Like, when you were ready to send the NF message, right? Like, the screen could have anything you want on it. But now Android 4 and up, they take that screen and they force that beam animation.
No, that's not true, because it really depends on what application is in the foreground. So with like the inventory example, let's see if I have it in here. Let's see if I have this other one. Because the idea is that there's a difference between foreground NFC interaction and, sorry, I can't read at the same time. Sorry, I don't have it on here. But there's a difference between having something, an application in your foreground and having something in the background do react to NFC. So if you have...
I'm talking about sending, sorry, I'm talking peer-to-peer.
Yeah, so if both applications have them in the foreground, you don't have, like, Beam doesn't take over. It doesn't take over. So as long as you, the app that you're trying to send the information from, if you have this enable foreground NF push, it takes over Android Beam. So Android Beam is more for when you don't have a fallback. It sort of kicks in, but if you do have the foreground...
so call the Gingerbread, just call the Gingerbread method.
Yeah. Well, actually this one, set NDEF push message callback. It does the same thing. It's improved because you can send, instead of creating the NDEF data beforehand, you can actually do it in a callback. But it actually acts in the same way. So as long as you have it in the foreground, that's when you can skip over Android Beam stuff and just work purely with your own peer-to-peer NFC protocol.
Thank you. And then totally different, do you have any tips for discoverability? Like, I've written about a lot of features, including NFC, mainly just to get Google's love to put us in feature spots in the Play Store. Really, we track analytics and like no one discovers the features, right? Do you have any tips for that?
So getting your app?
No. Just getting the NFC feature noticed, because it's pretty invisible, right? Like, how do you devote like pixels or animations to like encouraging use?
Yeah, so it's sort of like say with hashables, because like part of theirs is sort of like this LinkedIn / Twitter social sharing thing. They actually like spend time to create this graphic to sort of educate people, and you probably will have to do that for the next few years, because not a lot of people are going to understand what NFC means or like what you actually do to enable NFC. So it might just be, so what they did when they had the app was this sort of almost like an kind of looks like an ad banner or like a button was at the bottom. So if you clicked on it, it sort of came up and showed you how to use NFC. So there is sort of like a UI element to NFC where, let me see if I can go back. Where like this Samsung example was awesome because it sort of trained you into like what you should be doing without really explicitly saying, this is how NFC works. So it's just like touch your phone to the back of this poster and then you get like a little surprise. So it is like a UI thing. So if you are having trouble with just UI, then maybe it's something where you might want to work with someone who's a user experience designer.
But it's not just UX, it's like knowing the moment that a user is going to want to know that feature is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, so if you have...
Yeah. Going to want to use that feature.
Yeah, and I can't really like say anything that will answer it for every single app. But if you do want to talk afterwards about your specific app, I can definitely try to help with that.
And we have a last question right here.
All right. I know you didn't want to talk about the secure wallet and secure element, but this whole thing was about moving forward and thinking beyond the future. I mean, I can go around my apartment and equivalently sticky note everything with an NFC tag, but without access to the secure element, we can't really technically move forward. I mean, anything we leave up to the carriers, is that really the best thing to do? I mean, what do we do about the secure element privileges?
Okay, so I didn't hear most of that question, but are you sort of saying, how can we move forward with NFC if we can't control the secure element?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and so definitely a secure element and mobile payments will be what pushes NFC into the mainstream. But I think there's a lot of other interesting things to do with NFC, mostly around the peer-to-peer and just using it for personal authentication. Because, like, if you look at Square, I believe it was Square, where their kiosk app is actually based around Wi-Fi proximity and having your face show up on their point of sale kiosk. So when you want to buy a coffee, you walk up and you purchase your coffee on your phone using your 3G network, but then you come up to the point of service sales and the clerk recognizes your face, like your avatar. So like that's actually a really interesting thought around like Square can actually just do all these things without even without having to get carriers or OEMs or anyone involved. Like they're just sort of doing their own thing. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these other interactions that, as developers, we have to empower ourselves to come up with workarounds. So I can't actually do very much around the secure elements. So I don't really have a great much answer for that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was blasted, but like security, like maybe it's a tag that only your phone can read. Don't you think that would like help out? So the secure element can validate that it's your tag and not someone else's. So you can make it only read only on your phone.
Okay, yeah. So you can see some different applications for that. If you want, we can talk afterwards, but I'm definitely out of time. We can talk more about that and what some of these use cases might be.
All right, thank you, Pearl.
Thank you.